When looking at the upcoming vote, the first thing to look at is there a need for a new school, or is it just a desire to have a new school? So let's take a look at that question first. The New England Association of Schools and Colleges, which you'll hear referred to as NEASC, has come in and evaluated the school. And they did this several years ago, and they looked at the structure of the school. They looked at several things, but they looked at the structure of the school. And they determined that there were several issues associated with the school, and we've been working on these issues over these past several years. Number one on that list is handicap accessibility. We have 2 stories in the high school, and the high school is not handicap accessible. We absolutely need to make that handicap accessible. Second thing is structural issues. There are some structural issues, there are operational issues, the electrical, plumbing, etc. 40 years old is failing. These structures, the plumbing and stuff, are embedded in concrete walls, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. There's also the education considerations that the labs and learning facilities just aren't up to 21st century standards. So NEASC has put Franklin High School on warning status and is working with us to get these issues addressed. And Franklin High School's accreditation is at risk until we get these problems addressed.
In 2005, the Franklin High School had their accreditation visit from the NEASC, the accreditation authority, and we were placed on warning status with respect to community resources for learning. That standard really assesses the community's contributions with respect to facilities and financial resources to support the educational program. The high school facility was found lacking in a number of areas. Primarily, the science labs were deemed not safe or appropriate for student learning. The building is not handicapped accessible, and then a number of concerns were addressed with respect to HVAC, plumbing, and a lot of infrastructure issues.
After determining that there was a need, the next thing we did was to look at what options we had to address these needs. So we're going to take a look at that now. So the town council established a building committee to go off and look at what options we had to address those issues that NEASC had identified. The town went and hired an engineering firm called Castle Booz. They analyzed the needs, they scoped the problem, they researched solutions, they scoped the amount of work and the associated costs that went with it, and they put these options on the table, and they developed multiple options. There were some build new options, and there were multiple renovation options as well. As part of this overall process, it's in the town's best interest, of course, to work with the Mass School Building Authority, MSBA, and that's because the state will reimburse you the cost for major renovations or build new schools. And so we engaged with them, and they have a very specific process that we had to follow. We followed those processes, presented the options to the state, to MSBA, for their consideration and feedback.
I don't know what the intents of the architects were, but just from looking at the infrastructure design, it's a very challenging building to renovate. We as a community looked to renovation, and when we started looking at the structures, the plumbing is all embedded in concrete cement cinder blocks, which to do any upgrades to the plumbing system, and you have a 40-year-old plumbing system, you have to literally rip down concrete walls. So just on those facets alone, renovation became incredibly expensive.
After determining all the options, you take a look at the options and you evaluate these options. And you do cost-benefit analysis. What's the cost for each option? What benefits does it provide? And you come up with an ROI calculation, a return on investment. If I invest $1 on option 1, does that yield a better return than $1 invested in option 2? So in particular, looking at what was the cost-benefit analysis of investing in a renovation option versus investing in a new school. So Jeff, you've been on the building committee. You've gone through the analysis from when it started with Castle Booz and the renovation options. Can you bring me through that process at a high level? What did you find?
Sure. The building committee was appointed by the town council many years ago to look into how we could renovate the existing high school, given both its physical condition and the educational needs. After spending a couple years with an architect and a project manager looking at alternatives, it became apparent to the building committee that the cost of renovation simply did not make any sense to the building committee, that we couldn't justify spending 70, 80, 90 million dollars to upgrade a 40-year-old building, and we couldn't make a recommendation to the state about that. They came out and visited Franklin, and they recommended that we look into the model high school program, which we did. And we've gone down that road. It makes much more financial sense to get a brand new building for what is almost the same cost of the renovation.
Now, the MSBA has a say in this because remember, they're paying a lot of money on the cost of whatever gets done. So they have a lot of say in what options we do. And after looking at the renovation options and the expense and sending in their own engineers and evaluators to go over the costs, the actual need, they determined that the renovation option just wasn't a good option. And so they told us to go off and look at the model school program and to see what building a new school based on one of the existing models looked like. So we put that into the mix, we evaluated that, and then it's important to note that the MSBA makes a decision. That's what we see here. The MSBA made a decision as to which option they will contribute money toward. So the MSBA made their decision. What they told Franklin is, we will contribute almost 60% of the cost of building a new model school. Now we have the ability to make some tweaks to that model, but basically that's the only option that they will provide us any money for.
What has been interesting about the state's process to commit to funding a school building project is they really drive the bus on that decision. They looked at all the proposals and the economics of those proposals, and they made the decision to fund the model school program. They don't make decisions lightly. They have economists, financial persons, accountants really looking at all the data, and the most cost-effective decision for the community of Franklin was deemed the model school program.
Now that MSBA has made their decision, it's our turn, and that's what the vote on March 27th is about. Do we vote yes and build it, or do we vote no? Now if we vote no, what happens next? So let's take a look at that. The question on the table isn't, do we want to build a model school or do we want to do something different? It's a very specific question. And the question is, will Franklin accept 60% reimbursement from the state, and will we pay our share, roughly 40%, to build the model school? That's it. It's a yes-no vote, and that is the question. It will not be worded that way on the ballot, but that is the decision point. Will we accept the money and build the model school? Yes. Then we build the school. If we vote no, well, we still have the problem. They didn't go away. They still have to be solved. But now we rejected the state's money. And so now the onus is completely on Franklin. We have to pay 100% of that cost of whatever we do. The cost of every other option is greater than Franklin's cost to build a new model school. So now let's take a look at a summary of the situation. As we've shown, the need is real. NEASC has come in and identified the issues and is driving us to resolution. Our accreditation hangs in the balance, and our accreditation is at risk until we address those issues. And even though you'll hear people excited about a new school, the driving force is not a desire by any group in town to just go build a school. This is a situation being driven by an external group to force us to address these issues, which are real issues. The options have been evaluated and selected by the state. They've gone through a thorough review. They brought in their own engineers, their own financial analysts, economists, etc., and gone through each one of the options we put on the table. And the state, MSBA, has come back and made their decision and saying none of these other options are a good option from a return on investment perspective. That's why they won't invest their money in it. 2 independent auditors have gone through to make sure that all the costs for a build new, a model school, and a renovation are all supportable by the numbers, and they're all real. The town didn't just pick a new school option. We didn't look at all the options and say, but we just want a new school. So the only option to get any state money is to vote yes. The only thing a no vote does is reject the state money. It doesn't remove our obligation and our requirement to solve the issues. Looking at our choices, it's an easy set of choices. It's a yes/no vote. You vote yes. What we're voting to do is to accept the state money, agree to pay our share of it, to take out a 25-year mortgage, which will be paid via property taxes for that period of time, and we build the new school, which is a model school. A no vote, we reject state money. Effectively, what we're saying is no, we're going to pick our own option, and we're going to pay 100% of whatever option we choose. So a no vote is going to cost us a lot more money, at least twice as much money as the cost of a yes vote.
You know, it's always a tough time to vote yes to raise property taxes, but from a pure economic standpoint, it's the no vote that's going to mean higher property taxes and lower property values in Franklin. Those higher taxes come from the burdens of our community having to maintain that facility. We're still going to have to address the accreditation issues that NEASC raised, but that's going to be 100% from the coffers of the town of Franklin without any contribution from the state. And the burdens on our property values come from the accreditation issues. I think the real estate brokers who wrote a letter to the editor a few weeks ago said it best when they indicated that there's an absolute direct correlation between property values and school ranking in a community.
So what does a yes vote mean in terms of outcomes? Well, we have a historically high state reimbursement. As mentioned, it's almost 60%. It's interesting to note that when we first started evaluating the options several years ago, we were being guided by the state that the reimbursement rate was around 35%. We have historically low interest rates for the 25-year mortgage. So the amount of money we borrow, we're paying for it at very low interest rates, which is great. We don't have to start paying our share or paying back on that mortgage for a few years. All of these things work in our favor. They are all to our benefit.
And the state came down to visit this present school, and they agreed with us that we do need a new high school, very simply. Otherwise, they certainly wouldn't offer to pay 60% of the tab. Many of you don't have children or grandchildren in school. Neither do I, but I'm going to vote for it because I want to invest in the future of our children so they can compete in the world market. We have to do this. Please vote that day. Help me vote, and let's pass this school.
Please continue watching for another 30 seconds or so for a brief message from our town clerk about voting day.
Please remember for everyone to get out there to vote on March 27th. We all vote at the high school in the field house. The polls open at 6 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. Please remember to check your precincts when you're coming into the polls. Some of our streets have been changed and redistricted, so we're in a different precinct. So please be sure it'll only make things go more smoothly that day. So remember, March 27th, very early, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. There's no reason for anyone not to come out and voice their opinion.